Welcome to Out of the Noise podcast, a spiritual growth podcast. This podcast is about holding sacred space to help assist humanity to raise their consciousness through connection by having courageous conversations out of the noise of mainstream with heart-centered leaders, wisdom keepers, and divine humans expanding into their authenticity and soul purpose. We will explore spiritual concepts, practices to deepen into your healing and the collective. Priestess Lilly is a medium, light activator, and heart-centered leader that is committed in raising the light frequency and consciousness here on Earth for us all. You can work with her and learn more by visiting www.priestesslily.com. Enjoy your spiritual learnings.
Today's conversation feels truly sacred. I want to ask you, the listener, are you merely living in the world, or are you being in the world? And what does that mean to you? It's about recognizing the difference and stepping into a soul alignment, surrendering to the natural flow of life, and understanding that when we trust this process, life supports us in ways that we could never, ever imagine. Julie, like so many of us, has experienced moments of deep surrender and today explores the beauty and power within that space of being. I'm thrilled to welcome my guest, someone I've known for many years that I'd cared to omit, my high school friend, Julie Brown. Our journey together began in 1992, and through life, it took us on two separate pathways, and it's now beautifully aligned us back together. Before we dive in deep, if you enjoy this conversation, please take a moment to write a comment, review my podcast, and share the podcast with like-minded people. Your support would mean the world to me. Today, I would like to welcome Julie. Julie and I have known each other for, I'd hate to actually say how many years because it means we're old, but we went to high school together, didn't we, Jules?
So we could say that we've known each other since about 1992.
Yeah. Really? That long?
It sure is.
Yeah, isn't it? Out the gate.
It's exciting.
It is
How
exciting.
special.
It is
It's very
exciting.
special.
Yeah, it is special. And obviously when you leave high school, you take your different pathways and then you end up back together. And I think very much for myself right now, it's my soul family around me.
Well, that's interesting you say that, because I'm sure our conversation today will lead into where I've led in my life. But I remember in 2019, and I was relief teaching, and for whatever reason, I didn't work one particular day, and you were offering an amazing day where I could come along and we used these essential oils to actually create a particular essence that was, something that meant a lot to us. And we also did amazing baking because, of course, at that point in time, you had your catering business. And so you were able to offer all of your expertise and wisdom. And so it was like it was aligned that we were meant to meet up again together.
Isn't that random? I mean, I don't think anything at the moment, anything that's been happening has been random. I think the more you step into soul, the more you're divinely led.
Totally agree. And the more that we believe it, the more that it actually happens and supports us.
Yeah, which is really what our conversation is about today. Opening of living in the world versus being in the world. And I think, when I feel into, people around me, you are very much doing it. And that's why I wanted to have this conversation today, because I think it's such a sacred conversation that a lot of people have got no concept of even how to do that.
Sure. And for me, one of the big words that might come through today is surrender, because there have been so many moments in my life, particularly recently, where I have surrendered to the flow, because if I fight it, if I try and go against it, then it just comes up with challenges and my day doesn't go so well.
So, Jules, I know, so much about you, but for those listeners that are just starting to listen to the journey of, deepening into themselves, Tell me a little bit about yourself so they can understand where you were versus how you have grown.
Okay, well, I think one of the main areas to focus on is at the end of high school, we had those deep conversations about what we were going to do with our lives. And I remember knowing that I wanted to work with children. And so I decided that primary school teaching was for me. And so went off to university, did the study, and then was fortunate enough to get a position at a school that really supported me. And, you know, in terms of the education system, it was a great place to be. And so I taught for 14 years. And toward the end of those 14 years, I really noticed that I needed something else, that the getting up, going to work, owning a house, being part of that journey just wasn't really fulfilling another side of my soul or my presence. And so I decided to resign and I went over to Canada. And unfortunately, in Canada, they didn't recognize qualifications or experience. And so ended up knowing again that I really wanted to work with children. So I was a nanny, and I was a nanny on the beach. The family that I nannied for had a beautiful beach house, and I was living in the city. And so each day I would leave the city, leave the noise behind, and I would travel to the beach. And then I would take these two children, they were 3 and 1. And we would go to the beach, we would go to the library, we would go to music and movement classes. There was a really fun cafe there that really catered to the children. I just remember sitting on the beach with them, playing with them, and realizing, oh my gosh, there's a large part of life that's really telling me to slow down, really telling me to be in the present moment. And so I continued in Canada with a second family after that particular summer family. So in the again, noticed how much time I was spending outside in nature with these children. The family were very nature focused. They wanted their boys to be outside as often as possible. And so had gone from being really in an enclosed space with the classrooms in New Zealand to being in such a nature environment. And it really made me realize that there was a part of life that I was missing out on. And so when I came back to New Zealand, I decided that I would look at relieving. And that over the last, it's coming up to about 8 years in general, but that's really showed me balance of life that I didn't have. And so I've definitely known the contrast between the way that I used to live and think that that was supporting me to really slowing down, honoring myself and doing the relief work that supports me, but also knowing that some days it's just not meant to be. I'm just going to block myself out and I'm going to take care of myself.
You know, just in everything you just shared there is just so much richness. Because I think,
Good.
that honoring ourselves just is something we don't do as females as a whole, or anyone, actually listening to what we actually need. And I think, when I feel into what our deep learning is right now as a collective consciousness, it is honoring ourselves.
Absolutely. And for each of us, that word honoring means different things. And so for us to be able to accept what it means to us and to be able to find that specific need, perhaps, and honor that need and meet that need, then that's the best thing that we can actually do.
Absolutely. So obviously coming back from Canada and starting to live more authentically, you're aligned with your being in the world, that would come with its own challenges, because obviously you've had to probably unwind a lot of belief systems and, hierarchical structures that we're conditioned with as little kids or within our family. How's that been for you?
Absolutely. Well, when I came back in 2015, I actually met quite a health challenge. And at that point in time, it made me realize that I'd been living with stress and that stress was normal. And so my body thought it was normal to feel anxious. My body thought it was normal to live in such a rushed pace. My body thought it was normal to expect a lot of it. And really, that stress wasn't sustainable for me. When I returned, I sought quite a bit of support in terms of a breath worker, in terms of a holistic practitioner. Each of those person made me realize by asking me questions as well as giving me advice, and it made me realize what I was putting into my body. So the diet, it made me realize whether I was nurturing myself, again, coming back to those needs before. So I know I need a lot of sleep. And so to accept that, first of all, and to say, well, actually, I do need to go to bed earlier, or I do need to sleep in later. Yeah, you're right. The system or society have really placed these conditions on us. And even when I look at the hours that we're expected to work, for me to actually honor myself these days and say, my body's not wanting to work 5 days this week. I'm actually going to block myself out. Society doesn't really accept that perhaps you won't be working a 40-hour week. That has actually allowed me to question my values, and it's also allowed me to question my people pleasing, because sometimes I have to ask myself, well, am I being a chameleon? Am I trying to fit in to what other people expect of me? Or am I actually saying, this is what I know I need, this is where I can actually thrive, rather than just get through the day and try and survive?
Yeah, I can totally identify with that. When I owned Miss Lily's, I was so used to being the exhausted woman that had a to-do list a mile long, that would get up and just carry on and just put a big girl pants on, that would work 40 hours in a weekend and come to Monday just to be so exhausted that she had nothing to give, her son or her husband, or, the people that I wanted to give to, that it was something so deeply conditioned in me that you have to work hard to earn your money. And it was that was really at the expense of my physical body. Every Monday, my back would be so sore, my sciatic nerve. I'd have to go to a massage therapist to basically jig me so I could survive another week. And, that for me was a massive awakening around, is this actually really serving me? Soul level, like being this person that is not present and exhausted. And, for me, it was COVID that first lockdown that gave me I knew it was coming, but it was that was when so many things started to settle in my bones around, what the hell are you doing, Lily? Like, what are you actually doing?
And that's a big question that you've asked. Is it actually serving me?
And I think that's the thing. We're so conditioned to just be on the treadmill of life rather than being present, that we don't even think about, is this serving me? Or is this actually for my highest good? Or what does it look like? I think they're conversations that we don't even think about as a whole, because when we think about it, it gives us anxiety, exactly what you said. We get feedback. Our body is consistently giving us feedback, and then we have to change. And holy shit, I've got to change this. So what do? We don't want to change. So we resist that. And then that's exactly like you said. Like for me, my body was physically giving me feedback. I was physically getting sick. And, exactly what you shared, that, us as a human species, it just blows my mind, the level of resistance for change, when we're actually we're here to evolve as a species. Everything is in continual changing. Everything is in flow. The seasons, the cycles. So why wouldn't we naturally be?
That's right. And it's a word that comes with a lot of fear, and it's a word that comes with a lot of panic for a lot of people. Although things are changing daily, it's when we actually have to step into that change that we often find that fear, or the mind takes over and it asks those questions like, what if? What about? and it doesn't necessarily lead us to supporting ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously for you, what does it mean to truly live versus simply existing? And how would you differentiate those two things?
Well, I think one of the big questions that I've been able to ask myself in recent years, how do I want to feel at the end of the day? That's one thing that I've noticed that's been really loud for me, because I don't want to feel exhausted. And I don't want to feel agitated. I want to feel calm. So in order for me to feel calm at the end of the day, or in order for me to feel present during the day, I do have to live differently. I have to be a human being. And so, of course, we're not human doings. And we do, unfortunately, ask ourselves a lot, what have you been up to? That sort of implies to us that we should be doing a lot. And it seems to be that sometimes that word stress, the word busy, is almost like fashionable. It's like, I'm so busy. I've been so busy. Oh, we're all busy. So yeah, for me, that's probably one of the most important questions I've asked, is about my energy. How do I want my energy to feel? How do I want my energy to be at the end of the day? So that's led me to really realize that some days I'm not living in alignment with my body, because my body does feel stressed at the end of the day. It does feel exhausted at the end of the day. And then that's where I do really have to think, okay, tomorrow's not meant for me. I need to really slow down, honor myself, and actually be me and be the best version of me.
Yeah, and I agree. I think, you know, are we here having a human experience? And as a human being, are energetic beings trying to fit in to a system, a structure, a society that actually prevents us from energetically being. And I think the interesting thing, like just what you just shared, we are so out of alignment spiritually, mentally, physically, emotionally, from our soul, from our actual purpose and being here, because we've made, you know, exactly what you just said. We think we are a human doing rather than a human being. And that's the thing, when you come to at life with that and realize that you can change and step out of the norm, out of the noise, out of the structure, out of the 50 hours a week, you actually start to reclaim what's important. It makes space for what it is that you're here to do, and it allows more divine essence, wisdom to come through you, for you to be able to make the changes. Would you agree?
Absolutely, I would. And I've had times this year where, for whatever reason, I haven't necessarily worked. And at times I've thought, my mind has taken over, and I've thought, oh my gosh, I need to work. I should be working. And when I've surrendered to not teaching for one particular day, sometimes spirit or the universe has led me to the most amazing experiences, and I've felt like I'm really soul-led. And it means more time out in nature. It means discovering places that I would never have otherwise discovered. It means just letting the car sort of lead me to an area, and then letting my body go on a walk and just appreciate the little things in life, the simple things that a busy day can forget.
Yeah, I totally agree. I remember when I was so conditioned to being that exhausted woman, and my girlfriend said to me, Marie, Lily, have you ever thought about just sitting on the couch for 10 minutes and just having your phone on a timer for 10 minutes and just forgetting about the washing, the to-do list, the emails, the everything? And I remember starting this before COVID, and that 10 minutes initially, for probably about the first month, felt like the most irritable thing I ever did. But in that 10 minutes of stillness, I really started to attune into my nervous system and was like, what the hell? I'm so used to being that rushing woman that, this energy is so friggin' normal to me that, that 10 minutes then turned into 20 minutes, that then turned into, during COVID, an hour on the couch reading, the Outlander series. Like, I think I read during COVID every Outlander book there was. But it was actually about realizing how conditioned I was to that woman, because that part of my conditioning was actually what I needed to let go of, because she wasn't serving me. She shows up every now and then because she needs to get shit done, but she actually wasn't serving me, and she wasn't serving me mentally, physically, and my health. I just think now, and I'm not saying I have the perfect health and I have my life completely 100% sorted. I'm like apples and oranges away. It's amazing.
Exactly.
I think that's what we really want to, because so many people right now in the struggle of life are in the struggle of doing and living, and they'll say to us, we've got mortgages to pay, we've got this to do, I can't just quit my job, I can't just do all that. But why we're having this conversation is because it's really about starting to identify and taking the first baby step, isn't it, Jules?
It sure is. And so for some of us, that baby step can actually be quite out of our comfort zone. Even though we say the word baby step, it might be even just a 10-minute walk in nature, identifying with your senses. So that's just looking, listening, touching, out in nature. I mean, it sounds simple, but actually I've noticed myself feeling quite unmotivated to make that step just to walk outside. I think it's too cold, and I can come up with excuses. Taking one baby step initially it should sound quite easy to go outside and walk around the garden for 10 minutes, but some days the body just doesn't want to do that. It doesn't want to move. So I agree. Identifying what that baby step might be and then moving toward it is definitely supportive.
And I think that's important, because then it becomes a sacred practice. And, what I want to say is, we look consistently for the purpose being outside of us, but what happens if the purpose is actually us living an authentic life, being authentic being? And when I feel into that, no one else is going to show up for me unless I show up for myself. And that starts with me being responsible. That starts with me starting to do the work. When you say do the work, some people don't even know what the work is, but it's really about that. Start to form it into conscious practice, into a sacred practice. I'm going to commit to 10 minutes a day being in nature. Some days it's a walk, some days it's sitting on the deck, some days it's sitting outside having a cup of coffee. And so I really think don't think of it as something dramatic and big we have to change. That scares the living shit out of us. And we'll always find excuses not to do it. Our ego will always fuck us up on the way through. But just that small piece, would you agree?
Oh my gosh, I would really agree with what you've said. I can relate to what you've said. I definitely noticed that in the past, my body has, as I said, spoken so loudly to me, but I've ignored it and I've put it to the side. And whereas now I notice the difference in my body, and it knows that walking outside is more supportive to me, to going into nature, actually even going out in the rain. Like, so many of those practices are much more supportive. But when I first started it, there was resistance. The body wanted to resist, that's for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So how does your approach to living shift when you focus on being present rather than chasing goals or your outcomes? Because obviously we live in a world that is all about setting a goal. Everything's about setting a goal in a direction. How does it change for you when you're living? Because obviously you still have goals, Jules.
Of course. However, it's like having a big picture, but it's not focusing on the to-do, it's focusing on the to-be. And so what I've noticed in particular is that I am more present when I'm around people. So I'm more active listening. I remember in the past, I'm going back 20 years ago, but I can definitely remember my brain, my mind just tick, 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 ticking over, and me not being present to what someone was telling me. Although I looked like I was listening, although I could retain what had been said by them, in the meantime, I was doing my best to think, I need to do that, I need to do this. My mind isn't as active. And I know that we're really fortunate with our brains, and that our brains are extremely clever and that they can do these amazing things for us. However, I've been able to really connect consciously to my body more, and I've been able to connect more to my breath. And so that allows me to slow down, and it allows me to make sure that the day isn't just this rush of going, is a day of being. There might be times where I do feel rushed. However, I definitely notice pretty quickly that things don't always go according to I feel supported. It's about definitely noticing that difference within my body. And so for someone else looking at me, they probably wouldn't realize the difference between whether I was a stressed person or whether I was a very present person, because all of that energy is moving through my body in a certain way. It's all about how I perceive it and my awareness of my body.
And I think that's really interesting what you just said, breath. Breath is air, but it's also spirit. It's our connection to spirit. It's our connection to the stillness. So we can be open to receive. And when you say like breath work, when you said that, I was like, yeah, it's the stillness. And when we sit in the breath of air, the connection to spirit, it centers us and it allows us to receive. It opens us up to receive energetically, because our body is consistently a vessel, and that's how they talk to us. So in order to become more aligned with ourselves, we have to be more in our physical body. We have to be more connected to our body. In a world right now, connecting to our body through feelings, through how we feel when we're watching TV, through the food we eat, is everything, all the power that we've given away. This is why people right now are awakening to Big Pharma. This is why people are awakening to the food we consume, to the media, to the programming, because all of that is stopped. All of that is dense energy that stopped us connecting, that stopped us being more sovereign and, being able to receive. It's all there for a reason. When a person is connected to their sovereign self, we are fucking powerful. We are powerful. We are powerful beings of light. And so, of course, they don't want us to connect, because we're all connected as human beings and to our sovereign self and to our innate knowing and to our wisdom, and had that sacred remembering. The reality is half the shit that's happening in the world wouldn't be happening.
Of course not. I can relate to what you're saying, because I used to hold my breath. And I used to have such shallow breathing. And so you've talked a lot about the breath there, and that connected conscious breathing. For me, I breathe a lot through my nose. So in my nose, out my nose. And that has supported me hugely. And then leading on from what you've been saying, my gosh, yes. It's crazy to think that if we looked at the lifestyle of people 100 years ago, or if we looked at the lifestyle of people even just 50 years ago, wow, compared to what our lifestyle is now, just the sensory overload. For me, I'm a very sensitive person, and I've noticed that when I'm supporting myself, I can't overload myself in a sensory way as much as what I used to be able to, because the noise, what I'm looking at, it's just too much for me.
Yeah.
And so you are so busy. And of course, we're getting more and more and more and more and more thrown at us. And the capacity for the body to survive that.
Yeah. process that, survive that, consume that is just, it's not actually normal. We're not made to do all that.
I agree.
Yeah. And I think that's the thing. I think when I feel into just that in itself, why do you think we have the highest rates of suicide and mental health right now? We're trying to do too much. We're comparing ourselves. Yeah. We're in fear. We're giving our power away to a system that's never going to be able to fix us to some degrees, because we're actually not here to be fixed. We're here to be, we're here to honor ourselves, reclaim ourselves, remember ourselves, embody ourselves. It'll never understand. The system will never understand because it has a limited viewpoint. You've all got to fit in this box to get help. That's really, we're not meant to be in boxes. We're not meant to be in bloody questionnaire sheets and checklists, and we're all innately different because we're all different. We all receive differently.
That's right. But there are still so many situations out there that expect us to be the same.
And I mean, that's like, I look at it, that's the conditioning that's right from the minute a child is born, education to university. That is the pressure that we put on ourselves right from the beginning, as soon as we're here. And I'm so just true. Like, what? Hello, people. That's the bit that I just go, not all meant to be the same.
That's right, but it does take a lot for us to step outside of it. And, I'm living quite a different life perhaps to what society would say for me. I'm 46, I'm single, I have never been married, I've never had children. For most of this year I've spent at house sitting, and so I've been living in other people's houses, and I've moved from one house to another. So that takes a lot of courage to step outside of what people would say is normal, because that isn't what most people do with their lives. They don't live in that particular way. For me this year, I've gone from part-time working to full-time working to part-time going back to full-time. Again, to be able to have that flexibility and freedom, that serves me. That really supports me. However, I do understand that not everyone is able to choose some things in life. However, whatever you can make to work. There's a friend of mine who's, we often have chats and say, what if we did start work an hour later in winter so that we can avoid those frosty mornings, so that we are again looking after our bodies rather than staying with what we deem as not a normal time to be going to work or to school.
Yeah. But here's the thing, Jules, when I look at you, and I just go, and this is me, and so many of the listeners will be like, wow, that's so courageous. I couldn't do that. But when I look at you, I go, you are living aligned with what you physically need. And exactly what you said, you're so led by spirit, so led by your soul self, that you don't have a lack. The resources of whatever it is that you need will just continually show up. And that is that's that being, that's that living in continual flow, which is very much what you said at the start of this podcast. I surrender and I just trust to be open to the flow of life. And I think that's so important. We're so used to trying to go against the current, and wondering, why isn't this working? What's wrong with this? Why isn't this happening? That what happens if we just stopped, paused, took breath, surrendered, anchored into our bodies more, so we could gain fuller clarity. And I think that's really what we're trying to say here to people, is have the courage to be still, to listen.
True. And something that's come up while you've been speaking is that Gratitude has been a huge word. And so keeping a gratitude journal, because when you've been talking just now and talking about that word abundance, a lot of people automatically go to money, money currency for abundance. However, at the end of the day, writing all the things you're grateful for, it's amazing what has actually come to you in a day that is completely abundant, whether it is nature or flowers, whether it is baking or food, whether it is someone else getting in your washing or someone else pouring you a glass of water, whether it's, a child in the classroom who draws a picture and gifts it to you. There are so many different ways that we're actually extremely abundant. However, we don't necessarily appreciate it or realize it until we do a practice like a gratitude journal, and that's when we realize, oh my gosh, the amount of people and the amount of things that have happened to me today have shown me how truly abundant I am.
Yeah. And I think that I totally agree. And I think we live in a society that normalizes us not seeing that and just being in fear
and having a lack.
Where I go, there's more, at the moment, that's the narrative that is being programmed into us: lack, scarcity, survival. Mother Earth will always provide for us because she's in continual cycles. But not only that, I go, there's more than enough resources to go around. There's more than enough resources. We go, we need money because that's part of our programming. Where I go, resources are the neighbor giving me bacon. I laugh when I go to Christchurch. I laugh at myself because it's, like clockwork, not that I asked, but every second client comes with something. Yay. Whether it be flowers, whether it be food, whether, I've got this amazing client that brings me expensive bottles of champagne, and I laugh and I just go, I'm open to receive, thank you, but it's that it doesn't always have to look like money. It can be a conversation too. When you're having a bad day and someone just rings you up and just, you've got a space to speak.
I noticed that the other day, a man opened the door for me, and that was enough just for me to realize he's actually thought about me. He's actually doing something so kind to me. Yes, I could have opened that door by myself, but it actually made me feel really important or special, something little.
This is interesting, but I'm just going to share this. So yesterday I went to Nelson to meet my sister, and we were at the playground, and there were two older boys there being really destructive, breaking shit. The energy was horrible. There would have been about 10 other families there with children playing, and there were lots of parents there. And as I was walking to the toilet, I kind of went to myself, when have we been in a society that's just accepting of that being normal behavior? When have we been in a society that is just living and pretending that we can't see that, pretending that we don't want to address that behavior? We just think that that's the new norm. And I went to the toilet and come back, and I spoke to my sister-in-law. And she goes, did you see that? And I said, yeah. I said, I just find it fascinating. And I was going to go and say something, but by the time I came back out of the toilet, they'd gone. And I said, did anyone come and say anything? No. I said, isn't it just amazing that if we want to change the culture or we want to change the way we live, we actually have to, there's all these people just living and not speaking, or just too scared to speak, or there's no responsibility. But clearly, as that child was destroying park, everyone just went about their day. To me, that was him screaming out for some help. And I know that people would say, oh, it's safety, and how do you know he's not on drugs and all of those things. But I just went, when have we become a society that is so consumed in ourselves that we actually don't see what sits right in front of us? And that's the difference between living and being.
Oh, that's a big question as well.
It comes back to the grassroots energy. It takes a community to raise a child. And I think that essence is because we're too busy all being separated and poking fingers and not owning our work or taking responsibility, and it's too hard and it's too much and da 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 da, we've forgotten who we really are as an innate being, because we are light. So if we are light, how do we spread our light? And I think it's about having those bigger conversations with people. I think there's no conversation that isn't touchable if you come from that place of higher guidance. Would you agree?
I do. And it's really interesting you talk about light, because that's definitely something that we can take through each of our days. How can we be the light in someone else's day? How can we be that person that actually acknowledges someone else? And for those children that you're talking about in the playground situation, a gentle reminder might actually be enough. However, it's sometimes the way that we approach a situation or a circumstance that makes all the difference, isn't it? Yeah. So for some of us now, we can actually realize that, yes, there is an element of showing the way, leading the way, being the light in the world.
I think that's more important right now than ever. We are living in some pretty horrific times on the earth, because we are rebirthing and we're being asked to rebirth into a higher level of consciousness, because this is a spiritual war. We are being asked to awaken to our innate self. Not everyone's going to make it through the gates. I'll just say it for what it is. And I've been saying that for a long time, but hopefully people are listening now. And first it comes first. In order to heal the collective, we have to heal ourselves. We have to look at the stuff. We have to start thinking about, the bigger conversation about how we're living in the earth versus being. Because I think we're being called to the being now. Because when we become to the being, the living will come second nature, because we'll be coming from a higher consciousness around all the issues that we have, because we'll be expecting more. And this is why so many people right now on the earth are being activated, because the living situation, the governments, the structure, the is trying to serve the old paradigm.
Yeah, and I think you actually had a good analogy at one stage, and that was about sort of, rowing down a stream. It flows. You go with the flow. However, at the moment, there's an element of feeling like we are going upstream. And so, to be able to take a step back and to be able to identify, can I be more conscious of my day? That allows us to be more in flow and to go down the stream as opposed to up it.
And I think it's actually just a small shift. It's just a small shift. And becoming a little bit more present. It's not a big, I'm going to save the world. It's just a small shift, because then energetically we start that ripple effect of that vibration of our own light, that we anchor into it, the more that it gives other people permission. And this is why I think this podcast is so powerful about living versus being.
Yeah, and something that comes to mind as you speak now, for me, I've been able to be more present to nature, and in particular, the nighttime sky. And so I've always had a real fascination. I've obviously taught children in the past. And of course, children have this lovely idea that scientists wear white lab coats and glasses, etc., and they usually use chemicals, whereas we're all scientists. And I try and encourage children to remember that they are scientists, and by going out and looking at the sky, then you're actually observing, and that's one of the biggest things you can do in science. And so for me, I've always been fascinated with the moon, and I've been really lucky enough over the last few years to be able to understand more of the spiritual side of the moon rather than just the scientific side of it.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I did was I tracked my energy levels related to the moon. And on a wheel, I was able to identify the times in the moon cycle where I had low energy. And so I would color it in red. And then when I had high energy, and I would color it in green. And I monitored it over months and months and months. It was really interesting to be able to notice the difference and notice when I actually had to block myself out and say, I'm going to have a self-care day that time in the moon cycle, whether it was a full moon or whatever it might be, because that day doesn't actually serve me, and I'll put myself out into life, and life will show me a lesson, and it usually taught me quite a big lesson. And so I would then have to honor myself by feeling the feelings and experience the emotions in my body of whatever was a consequence of putting myself into those life situations. And for me, I mean, again, we've talked about that word honoring, but that has been really honoring because we are a feeling being. It's really important that we understand what our body is telling us. And as I said earlier, I am quite sensitive. And so I've noticed that depending on what's happening in the sky with the moon, it's got a huge effect on me. I mean, what percentage of water are we? And of course, if you look at the impact that the moon has on the high tide, the low tide, of course it's going to have an impact on us as water beings.
Yeah, absolutely. I just did a post on water consciousness.
Oh, looking forward to it.
Today. That was really interesting. Hey, Jules, what do you think your soul mission is? What did you think your soul mission was when you first left high school versus what you think it is now? I'm curious to know.
Yeah. Okay. So when I first left high school, it was all about the work factor. So it was about the achievement. It was about who I was going to be, but more in terms of that person in society or that financial gain. So back then, a teacher was held in high esteem, well respected. They had a huge sense of responsibility. And so there was a part of me that back then wanted to be a teacher because it came with so much respect. It came with this huge honor. However, now I've definitely asked that question multiple times, and yeah, the question is, who do I want to be? Well, I want to be calm. I want to be present. I want to be. And so it's lovely to be able to receive those compliments and know that it's me as a person. And of course, there's been a big focus on personality in society, but it's me as a being that is actually appreciated, and other people acknowledge me. They acknowledge me. They don't acknowledge me because of what I've ticked off a list, but they acknowledge my essence, my true essence. And I think for me, that's probably what I'm most proud of at the moment, is that transition from wanting to be someone who society might say up here to then just saying, okay, I am enough. It's me, I am enough.
Oh, I love that. So many people listening to this podcast will absolutely resonate with that, Jules.
Thank you.
And that's where, exactly that shift. For so long, the purpose was outside of you, and now the purpose is you.
That's actually, now that you say that, that's exactly what I've summed up.
Yeah. And that's actually what we're coming back to. If we want to be fully embodied, we have to embody our soul essence.
Yeah, I agree. Totally.
And that's our purpose. Our purpose here is us, not the external, it's us.
And being more of our authentic self. And so for me, being kind is me, being calm, being present, then I feel most authentic, and I can end that day feeling like I've lived in my energy.
Yeah, I love that. I absolutely love that. And I know that there's so much richness in just that. So I just want to ask a question, because what advice, there'll be lots of people listening to this podcast that will be struggling. They will be struggling to find balance between living a full life and simply being present in the moment. So what advice would you give them?
Yeah, the first one, I highly recommend anything that they can accept that could be self-care. And so for a lot of us in the past, we haven't been able to accept that it's important to take care of ourselves, especially perhaps as a female, we do tend to give outside of ourselves. My first question would be, how are you taking care of yourself? What are you doing that is for you? What kind of self-care practices do you have? Whether it is sitting down and drinking a herbal tea, whether it is being present to nature in some part of your day, whether it is having a bath if you like that, putting on music that you enjoy, singing to that, whether it is just lighting a candle and having it in the background, just that smell can actually be quite nurturing to ourselves. And then the second question I would encourage people to ask themselves is, have you thought recently about what your values are? What do you value in life? And if so, are you living aligned to those values? So if you value peace and calm, where is the peace and calm in your life? If you value fun, where is the fun in your life? If you value friendship or relationships, how often are you connecting with others and nurturing those relationships and connections? So yeah, two questions, self-care and what are your values and how are you living aligned to your values?
Love that. Love that. So Jules, what spiritual practices do you do to help you align more with your authentic self as you grow more into you?
I think the first one is the breath. And it may sound crazy to other people that the breath would be such a spiritual practice. However, we all have to breathe. We all breathe daily, and we need to breathe in order to survive. I've learned, as I've said already, about how shallow my breathing was. Once I became really conscious of my breathing, I then encouraged myself to establish those practices. In the morning, I do remain in bed and I do start consciously connecting my breath, allowing the in and the out to be of even length. And as I said earlier, to breathe through my nose. Same with the end of the night. I've been so grateful for the decrease in the amount of time it takes me to get to sleep, because I'm able to consciously connect that breath. And really often I will breathe up into my crown chakra and then right down to my root chakra. And so for me, that's a huge learning, because years ago, if you'd mentioned that word chakra, I wouldn't have had a clue what you were talking about. And so now a spiritual practice is actually breathing into each of my chakras and allowing myself to slow down and to, again, that word consciously very aware of each of the chakras, perhaps if there's any kind of emotion that's there, and accepting that emotion and allowing that emotion and moving through that emotion. And so that's quite a huge spiritual practice for me. It may sound quite straightforward, but the benefits of it, but also the flow and effect of carrying out that practice daily, could actually make me allow time and space for something quite significant. And that can also lead on to the spiritual support, because depending what arises when I'm consciously connected breathing, and depending on what arises when I connect to each of the chakra, may depend on what my next spiritual practice might be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. If I don't have time to be in the morning, that 10 minutes or 20 minutes every morning is the thing that sets me up for the day. So I'm a believer that you need to do a spiritual practice, and it sets you up to move you forward. And it means that your energy is like clear to move through the day.
And I've been able to live with you quite often, quite regularly over the last few years. I've seen your spiritual practices, and I know how dedicated you are, and I've seen a huge impact that those spiritual practices have had on your life. And for me, I really admire you for the dedication that you do have, because wow, it's just allowed you to have so much support and guidance in your life.
Yeah. Even I get wobbly with some of the stuff Spirit tells me I'm going to do. I'm like, yeah, don't think that I'm a master of it yet. There's some resistance happening over here. When you think about Jules, when you think about the bottle of champagne, we're not drinking champagne. We are drinking champagne, the house sale of our house. Holy bejesus.
That's what I was thinking.
That friggin' a breath work and a bloody spiritual practice all in one.
Exactly. But you continued, you kept going every day. You did something. And even some days were more significant than others. Definitely made sure that you're somehow moving through practice.
Yeah. So I'll just give some clarity to those that are listening. Well, 21. One of those years. I'm just not sure. Sold my house in Rangiora 4 times, people. 4 times. There was bottles of champagne. Jules came to the day that we finally thought we'd actually mastered it. I think that was round 3. And
exactly
at the good home having champagne and pizza. And I tell you, a year's journey of really having to show up when everyone around me was telling me something different, and having to be in my own energy field, really becoming clear, really trusting my guidance over everything else that was happening around me. There was so much fear because at this stage, we've got 3 mortgages we're paying. There was so much fear, but just consistently owning what I was told and clearing energy, grounding myself. There was a dedication 3 times. I have to say, though, the champagne was a good celebration, but, short-lived. But so you do get tested. But Jules was living with me during that time. I think she might have heard every colourful rainbow and plus some.
But also, it just reminds us how divine timing. We do put pressure on ourselves to have certain things happening by a certain time. But it wasn't meant to be for you.
And that's when I really realized about dominant energy, and I really mastered energy, learned a massive surge around you can manifest the crap out of something, but if the energy, you've got to make sure you've got the energy right. So, that was a massive, massive learning for me around dominant energy, the energy in the collective, energy of people around me, when they were in fear, how to actually shift people's energy out. And I learned a lot of wisdom around the land during that time. There was a lot of sacred there wasn't just me showing up every new moon doing a manifesting ritual. It was 365 days of the year, every morning, sometimes 3 times a day, just to get it really anchored, because I was friggin' determined. I was moving. Yeah.
And it's really interesting also when you talk about 365 days of the year. When we look at a planet like Mercury, when Mercury goes into retrograde, well, that's not the time to be signing anything. When we listen to the experts give us advice about what the planets are doing in the sky and the impact that it has on society, well, it's no wonder certain things don't happen when we want them to happen, because they're not meant to be. It's not meant to happen at that point in time.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, as we realize more about our own energy fields, we will realize how the planets and the sun and the moon really impact us. It's not woo woo. It's actually it's totally in guidance of our soul incarnation.
I agree with you. And we just have to look at certain cultures around the world who carry out planting, carry out harvesting, carry out other practices as a result of what is happening in the sky.
Love, love, love. Hey, Jules, is there any other words of wisdom you'd like to share with the listeners before we close off? Gorgeous.
Being aware is actually really valuable word. So our vocabulary makes a huge difference. And when we speak, those words put so much energy out into the world.
Mm-hmm.
I would definitely recommend that people remember to think or listen or acknowledge the vocabulary that they're using. As simple as, instead of saying, "How are you?" "How are you feeling?" Just by adding that word feeling, gosh, that can change the conversation. And then, as I mentioned earlier, instead of asking, "What did you do today?" "What are you doing in the holidays?" rephrase that. How would you like to be at the end of your holidays? How would you like to feel after your week away? I would definitely recommend people to think carefully about the words that we choose to speak, and just perhaps be aware and notice the impact that those words have.
Love, love, love. Absolutely. Hey, Jules, thanks for coming on my podcast. You shared so much wisdom that I know so many people will be able to connect with on multiple levels. And they, even so, if they might not be able to make that first baby step, at least, you know, you're living proof of it, sister, that they'll might not come to the table tomorrow, but they might re-listen. And I believe there's so much wisdom in these podcasts, and they're so divinely led by spirit.
Mm-hmm.
That's sometimes you have to listen to them twice to get more of the seeds of gem, of the seeds of the wisdom. So thank you so much for being so open to share, so open to speak your truth.
Thanks for having me.